Why did European settlers with their stone fireplaces and warm blankets freeze to death in places where the indigenous people felt comfortable? The history of the colonization of North America is full of tragic accounts of entire expeditions perishing from the cold, despite having the most advanced technology of their time at their disposal. At the same time, the Indians of the Great Plains and northern forests survived harsh winters in seemingly light and unreliable dwellings. The secret lay in a fundamental difference in approach. The newcomers tried to heat the air around them, spending enormous resources to combat the cold. The indigenous peoples acted differently. They did not fight nature, but used the laws of physics to capture heat and keep it in. Their dwellings were not just shelters, but complex engineering systems that worked like thermoses. Watch the video to the end to find out how ordinary birch bark could work better than modern insulation, and why a small flame saved lives more effectively than a huge roaring fire. What if I told you that the famous conical tent was more complex than a modern spacesuit? Many people perceive the tipi as a simple tent made of skins stretched over poles, but this is a superficial and mistaken view. In fact, this structure was a complex wind tunnel with adjustable draft and ventilation systems. The outer shell of bison hides was only the first barrier against the icy winds blowing from the plains. The conical shape was perfectly streamlined, preventing air pressure from tearing off the covering or destroying the frame even in the strongest storms. But the main secret of warmth was hidden not outside, but inside, in a detail that is almost never shown in films. This secret element was the inner lining, or dew canopy, which was attached to poles at human height. It descended to the ground, creating a second wall inside the dwelling and insulating the living space from the outside environment. There was an air gap several centimeters wide between the outer skin and this inner canopy. Cold air entering under the edge of the outer skin did not enter the living area, but rushed upward through this channel. This flow created a powerful draft that pulled smoke from the fire through the upper opening, acting as an invisible chimney. Thanks to this system, the inside of the teepee always had fresh air, but at the same time, the precious heat from the hearth was retained. The air in the layer itself acted as an excellent heat insulator, protecting people from the icy touch of the outer wall. The inner canopy also protected the inhabitants from condensation that could drip from the ceiling and from shadows that could reveal their presence to enemies outside. In summer, this system could be reconfigured by raising the edges for ventilation, but in winter it was sealed tightly. The Lakota and Cheyenne Indians knew that controlling airflow was more important than the thickness of the walls. In the center of the dwelling was a small hearth that required very little fuel to maintain a comfortable temperature. The heat from the fire reflected off the sloping walls and circulated inside, creating a comfort zone exactly where people sat or slept. The smoke, obeying the laws of physics and draft, rose straight up, without filling the living space or irritating the eyes. Unlike European fireplaces, which sucked heat out of the room along with the smoke, this system kept the heat inside. It was an ingenious design that allowed people to live in warmth in the middle of a snow-covered prairie with minimal wood consumption. In addition, the tipi itself was designed to take into account the windrows and the characteristics of the landscape of a particular area. The entrance was always located on the east side, facing the rising sun, which had both practical and sacred significance. This prevented the prevailing westerly winds from blowing directly into the dwelling when the door was open. The skins used for covering were treated in a special way to make them waterproof and translucent, allowing daylight to pass through. At night, when the fire was burning inside, the tipi glowed like a paper lantern, but the heat remained securely locked inside. Thick skins and woven mats were used to insulate the floor, isolating people from the frozen ground. In some cases, the space between the outer wall and the canopy was filled with dry grass for additional insulation. This multi-layered construction resembled the principle of a modern sleeping bag or thermal underwear. Each element performed its own function, and the removal of even one detail disrupted the entire life support system. It was a triumph of practical knowledge over harsh climatic conditions. It is important to note the mobility of this structure, which could be dismantled and reassembled in a matter of minutes. Tribes that followed bison herds could not afford to build permanent winter homes. They needed a home that they could take with them, but which would keep them as warm as a stone fortress. The teepee weighed relatively little, and the poles were used to create sleds for transporting goods. Thus, their home was always with them, ready to protect them from any weather. Europeans who first saw these dwellings often underestimated their effectiveness, considering them primitive huts. However, after spending a night in a teepee during a blizzard, they were surprised to find that they could sit inside without wearing outer clothing. The comparison with their own drafty log cabins and tents was clearly not in favor of civilization. The Indians proved that understanding nature provides more comfort than trying to shut it out with thick walls. It was this observation that allowed them to survive where others perished. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about a ventilation system that works without electricity or fans? Write about it in the comments. Ready to learn the truth about how you can live underground and feel better than in a palace? Tribes that lived along the Missouri River, such as the Mandan and Hidatsa, used a completely different approach to heat conservation. They built monumental earthen houses that resembled hills more than human dwellings. These structures used the thermal inertia of the earth itself, turning the soil into their main ally in the fight against frost. A thick layer of turf and soil covering a wooden frame created an impenetrable barrier against the cold. An earthen house was a dome-shaped structure up to 15 meters in diameter, sunk into the ground. The frame was built from massive tree trunks capable of supporting the enormous weight of the earthen roof. A layer of willow twigs was laid on top of the logs, then a layer of dry grass, and finally a thick layer of compacted earth. This layered roof acted as an ideal insulator, smoothing out temperature fluctuations in the external environment. In summer, such a house was as cool as a cellar, and in winter, the earth gave off the heat accumulated during the summer. The walls of the house were also covered with earth, which prevented any drafts and heat loss through cracks. The entrance to the dwelling was protected by a long, covered corridor, which served as a modern vestibule or airlock. This corridor prevented cold air from entering the living space directly when the door was opened. A heavy bison skin curtain at the inner entrance served as an additional airtight valve. Inside such a house, a microclimate was created that was largely independent of what was happening outside. In the center of the earthen house was a hearth, the smoke from which escaped through an opening at the top of the dome. Thanks to the excellent insulation of the walls and roof, the heat from one small fire was enough to heat a huge space. The earthen walls and floor heated up and began to function as a giant battery, radiating gentle warmth. Even when the fire died down in the morning, the temperature inside dropped very slowly. This allowed for the conservation of firewood, which was a valuable resource in the treeless prairie. Inside the house, along the walls, there were sleeping places raised above the floor on wooden platforms. This was done so that people would be in the warmest air zone. Supplies or tools were often stored under the platforms, creating an additional air buffer. The space was organized to make the most efficient use of every cubic meter of warm air. During the harshest frosts, the best horses could be brought inside, whose body heat further warmed the room. These structures were so sturdy that people often gathered on the roof of the house to observe the surroundings or simply chat. Over time, the earthen cover became overgrown with grass, and the settlement became virtually invisible against the backdrop of the landscape. This provided not only thermal protection, but also camouflage from hostile tribes. Repairs to such houses were rarely needed. Mainly, it was necessary to monitor the condition of the wooden supports. Earth as a building material was free and widely available. Interestingly, this construction principle was used by people in different parts of the world, but it reached perfection on the plains. The Mandan built entire cities out of such houses, which were true fortresses of comfort. Inside, it was dimly lit, but warm and safe, while outside, snowstorms raged. European traders who visited these tribes always noted the high level of comfort in their dwellings. It was an example of perfect adaptation to the conditions of the continental climate with its extreme temperature fluctuations. Such a house was a living organism that breathed and changed with the seasons. In spring, the grass on the roof turned green, and in winter, it was covered with snow, which served as an additional layer of insulation. Snow, as we know, consists of air and ice crystals, which makes it an excellent heat insulator. The more snow fell on the roof, the warmer it became inside the earthen house. Nature itself helped people to keep warm. They only had to use its gifts correctly. The construction of an earthen house required collective effort, which strengthened the social bonds of the tribe. It was not a dwelling for a single person, but a home for a large family or clan. Living together in large numbers also helped to conserve heat. Each person is a source of heat with a capacity of about 100 watts, and in a confined space, this played a role. In the next chapter, you will learn about a material that surpassed modern plastic and membrane fabrics in terms of its properties. Are you ready to find out what the Iroquois used to build their famous longhouses? Want to learn a secret that will change your perception of building materials of the past? In the northeast of the continent, where humidity was high and winters were snowy, the Iroquois created an architectural masterpiece, the longhouse. The basis of their heat-saving technology was tree bark, specifically elm and birch. These materials had unique properties that made them ideal for creating a waterproof and windproof shell. Bark is a tree's natural protection, created by evolution to survive in all conditions, and humans learned to use it for their own purposes. The longhouse was a huge arched structure covered with large sheets of bark laid overlapping like tiles. A key feature was the bark's ability to breathe, allowing vapor to pass through but retaining water and wind. This prevented moisture from accumulating inside the room, which is the main enemy of heat. Dry air is much easier to heat than humid air, and the Iroquois understood this perfectly well. The sheets of bark were held in place by an outer frame of poles, which made it easy to replace damaged sections without dismantling the entire wall. Inside the house, the space was divided into compartments, each of which housed a separate family. In the central passageway, there was a row of common hearths, each of which heated two families living opposite each other. The heat from the many fires combined to create a warm atmosphere throughout the entire structure. The smoke rose to the high vaulted ceiling and escaped through special openings regulated by long poles. In this way, the ceiling created a warm air cushion above the heads of the inhabitants. Along the walls were two-story bunks. The lower ones were used for sleeping, and the upper ones for storing supplies and belongings. The sleeping areas were raised above the ground to avoid contact with the cold soil and drafts below. The walls were further insulated with woven mats, which were hung over the bark inside the room. This created another air layer, working on the principle of double glazing. On the coldest nights, people slept together, warming each other with their body heat under shared skins. Birch bark, which was often used to build wigwams in more northern regions, deserves special attention. It contains tar and oils that make it completely rot-proof and water-resistant. Even a thin layer of birch bark can retain heat better than thick skin or fabric. This material was light, flexible, and incredibly durable, allowing for airtight joints. The Indians sewed sheets of birch bark together with spruce roots, coating the seams with resin to create a monolithic covering. The interior of a longhouse could be up to 100 meters long, accommodating dozens of people. The huge volume of air inside served as a buffer, smoothing out sharp temperature changes outside. When the door was opened, the cold air could not instantly cool the entire room, as it would in a small hut. The massive wooden structure itself accumulated heat and released it at night. Community life was not only a social advantage, but also a thermodynamic one. The Iroquois paid special attention to the orientation of their houses, placing them with their ends facing the prevailing winds. This reduced the wind load on the walls and minimized heat loss through gaps. Entrances were often protected by bark porches, where firewood and tools were stored. This layout turned the house into a fortress impenetrable to the cold. The forest around the settlement served as a natural windbreak, which was also taken into account when choosing a location. Surprisingly, bark harvested at a certain time of year retained its flexibility for decades. It was harvested in the spring, when sap flow was at its peak and straightened under pressure. It was a renewable, environmentally friendly, and high-tech material for its time. For a long time, Europeans could not understand why their stone houses were damp and cold, while the cardboard houses of the Indians remained dry. The answer lay in proper vapor exchange in the properties of natural wood. The craftsmen who built these houses did not use nails or metal staples. The entire structure was held together with bark and flexible rods, which gave it elasticity. During strong winds or snowfalls, the house would deform slightly, but not break, distributing the load. This flexibility also helped to maintain the tightness of the joints during thermal expansion and contraction. Nature itself suggested engineering solutions to those who knew how to observe it. Don't forget to like if you were surprised by the ingenuity of ancient architects. Your support helps us create more quality content. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us to subarctic regions where cold becomes an ally? The peoples who lived in the north and the tribes of the plains who faced deep snow knew a paradoxical truth. Snow keeps you warm. Freshly fallen snow is 90 to 95% air trapped between ice crystals. This makes it one of nature's best insulators, comparable to foam or mineral wool. Instead of clearing the snow to the ground, Native Americans often used it to insulate their homes. They piled snowdrifts around the base of their tipis or wigwams, creating a thick snow wall. This wall blocked all the gaps at ground level through which icy drafts could penetrate. In addition, it protected the lower part of the dwelling from direct exposure to the wind, reducing heat loss. Inside such a snow wall, the temperature was significantly higher than in the open air. This simple measure raised the temperature inside the dwelling by several degrees without additional firewood consumption. In extreme situations, hunters built temporary shelters made entirely of snow, known as kings. These were not classic igloos made of ice blocks, but piles of compressed snow in which a living space was dug out. The heat of one person in such a small space can raise the temperature above freezing, even if it is -40 outside. The walls of the shelter melted slightly from the inside, forming an ice crust that retained heat even better. The main thing was to make a small ventilation hole so as not to suffocate. An important element of snow architecture was the cold well, or lowered entrance. The entrance to the shelter was made below the floor level where people slept. Cold air, being heavier, flowed down and accumulated in this depression without entering the living area. Warm air, on the contrary, rose and remained under the dome where people were located. This simple physical principle created an invisible but effective door. Snow blocks were sometimes used as windbreaks for outdoor fires. The wall of snow reflected the heat of the fire back to the people sitting around it, preventing it from dissipating into the air. This combination of a heat source and a reflector allowed people to keep warm even with a very limited supply of firewood. The Indians knew how to quickly erect such shelters using snowshoes or bone shovels. The ability to work with snow was an essential survival skill. There were also permanent winter dwellings that were deliberately dug into the snow up to the roof. This created a thermos effect, where fluctuations in outside temperature were practically imperceptible. Inside such snowdrifts, life continued in warmth and comfort throughout the long winter. People wore light clothing, practiced crafts, and told stories. The snow reliably muffled the sounds of the storm, creating a feeling of absolute safety and peace. Even when traveling, hunters used the properties of snow to spend the night. They could dig a trench, lay pine branches and skins on the bottom, and cover themselves with other skins, allowing the snow to cover them. A microclimate was created under the layer of snow, allowing them to survive the night without frostbite. This required psychological resilience, but it was an extremely effective method. Fear of the cold gave way to knowledge of its properties. Surprisingly, animals such as partridges and small rodents used the same tactic, burrowing into the snow. Humans simply adopted this experience by observing wildlife and applying it to their needs. This proves once again that survival depended on harmony with the surrounding world. Instead of fighting the elements, it was necessary to become part of them. Snow ceased to be an enemy and became a building material. Using snow required an understanding of its structure and condition. Snow that was too loose could collapse, while ice that was too dense did not retain heat well. The Indians distinguished between dozens of types of snow and knew which ones were suitable for construction. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation. Why do you think modern architecture so rarely uses principles that have saved people from the cold for centuries? Unlike European clothing, which was tailored to fit the figure and often restricted movement, Native American clothing was layered and loose-fitting. It functioned as a mobile shelter that a person wore on their body. The main material was tanned animal skin, especially bison, moose, and deer. Leather has excellent windproof properties, but on its own it provides little warmth. The secret lay in what was underneath it and how it was worn. The main principle was to create air pockets between the body and the clothing, as well as between the layers of the clothing itself. The air, heated by body heat, had to remain inside without escaping outside. To achieve this, the fur was turned inward, toward the body rather than outward, as Europeans often did for beauty. The fur fibers created thousands of tiny pockets for warm air, trapping it close to the skin. The outer side of the skin was treated with fat and smoke to make it water repellent. Moccasins, the footwear of indigenous peoples, were a masterpiece of thermal insulation. They were soft and spacious enough to allow a layer of dry grass or moss to be placed inside. This plant-based insole worked like modern insulation, absorbing moisture and keeping the feet warm. If the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with fresh grass, which was widely available. This prevented frostbite on the feet, the most common problem during winter hikes. Pants and leggings were often not sewn tightly, but attached to the waistband, allowing for ventilation during active movement. If necessary, they could be wrapped tightly to retain heat. Winter capes and raincoats made of bison skins were huge and heavy, serving as blankets at night and coats during the day. Collars made of wolf or wolverine fur did not get covered with frost from breathing, which was critical for protecting the face. Special attention was paid to protecting the wrists and ankles, where blood vessels are close to the skin. Fur cuffs and lapels reliably blocked heat loss in these vulnerable areas. Women's dresses were often decorated not only for beauty, but also to weigh down the hem so that the wind would not blow up their clothes. Every detail of the wardrobe had a practical purpose, proven over centuries. Native Americans avoided tight clothing that restricted blood circulation. Good blood circulation is the body's natural heating system. Loose-fitting clothing allowed for easy movement, which in itself helped to keep warm. Static was the enemy. If you stand still, you freeze. If you move, you live. Clothing should not interfere with this vital activity. Special jumpsuits were sewn for children, in which the child was completely wrapped in fur. Soft rabbit fur or bird skins with down, which were incredibly warm, were often used. Sphagnum moss was used as a natural diaper and insulator with antiseptic properties. Keeping babies warm was a top priority. Interestingly, many elements of this clothing were adopted by trappers and early explorers of the Wild West. They quickly realized that their woolen coats and leather boots with stiff soles were not suitable for the local winters. Switching to moccasins and suede jackets was often a matter of life and death. It was a cultural exchange dictated by harsh necessity. Even decorations such as fringe had a utilitarian function. Fringe helped to quickly remove water from clothing during rain. Drops rolled down the straps without being absorbed into the main fabric. Fringe could also serve as spare material for repairing clothing in the field. In a world without stores, your clothes are your emergency supplies. Thus, each Native American wore a complex climate control system. It protected against the wind, retained heat, wick away moisture, and allowed the body to breathe. It was a technology based on a deep understanding of the properties of natural materials and human anatomy. Ready to learn the shocking truth about how entire families slept in the bitter cold? Night was the most dangerous time of day, when temperatures dropped to critical levels and human metabolism slowed down. To survive the night without a fire or with minimal heat, Native Americans used a strategy of collective sleep. The family would go to bed huddled close together, combining their warmth into a single energy circuit. This significantly reduced the heat loss of each individual. The bed was never laid directly on the bare ground, which quickly sucks out heat. First, a base was constructed from willow rods, creating an air cushion and a springy effect. Thick bison skins were laid on top of it, with the wool facing up, creating a soft and warm mattress. Other hides were placed on top, forming a multi-layered cocoon that maintained human body temperature inside. The smallest and most vulnerable members of the family were placed in the middle, where it was warmest. The bison capes used as blankets were incredibly heavy, but it was this weight that ensured a snug fit against the body. No draft could penetrate such heavy hides. Bison wool is thick and curly, and it retains warm air very well. Old smoked hides that were no longer suitable for clothing were often used, as they had become soft and cozy over time. The smell of smoke that permeated them also repelled insects and parasites. The head was often covered or hidden under the skin so that the breath would warm the air inside the cocoon. This created a microclimate with increased humidity and temperature, which was beneficial for the lungs in the dry, frosty air. Of course, this took some getting used to, but it allowed for deep sleep without waking up from the cold. The ability to relax and keep warm in such conditions was an important skill. In long houses, sleeping shelves were equipped with curtains made of skins or mats, turning each sleeping place into a small enclosed cabin. The volume of air in such a cubicle was small, and it was easy to heat it with the warmth of 1 or 2 people. This is reminiscent of the principle of capsule hotels or train berths, but made from natural materials. Privacy was combined with thermal efficiency. Interestingly, fatty foods were often eaten before bedtime, which acted as slow fuel for the body. Digesting fats releases a lot of energy and warms the body from the inside throughout the long night. It was a biological way of maintaining temperature, complementing external comfort. An empty stomach is the enemy of warmth, so dinner was an important ritual for survival. Waking up in the morning, people did not rush to get out from under their skins. First, they stoked the smoldering coals in the hearth, and only when the fire began to give off its first warmth did the family get up. This smooth transition from sleep to wakefulness helped conserve energy. A sudden cooling could be stressful for the body, weakening the immune system. The sleep system was thought out in detail to ensure recovery. Without quality rest, it would have been impossible to withstand the physical exertion of the next day. Warmth during sleep was not a luxury, but a biological necessity. The Indians knew how to create comfort out of literally nothing. Do you think you could fall asleep in such conditions, knowing that it was -30 outside? In the next chapter, you will learn why a large fire is a beginner's mistake and how to keep warm with a handful of twigs. Fire was the heart of any dwelling, but the Native Americans' attitude toward it was radically different from that of Europeans. The colonists liked to build huge fires, believing that the bigger the flames, the warmer it would be. However, a large fire required a lot of wood, created dangerous sparks, produced heavy smoke, and paradoxically, made your back freeze while your face burned. The Indians, on the other hand, adhered to the philosophy of the small fire, a small fire that burns constantly and economically. The secret was to sit close to the fire, literally hovering over it. The small flame allowed them to get close without getting burned and absorb the heat directly. The Indian said, "The white man builds a big fire and stands far away. The Indian builds a small fire and sits close." This saying perfectly described the difference in approaches to energy efficiency. A small fire is easy to control, does not burn oxygen in the room as quickly, and produces less smoke. Very little fuel was needed to maintain such a fire. Dry branches, dung, dried bison manure, bark, everything was used. On treeless plains where every log was worth its weight in gold, saving fuel was a matter of survival. The Indians knew how to choose wood that burned hot and without smoke, such as dry aspen or willow. Conifers were rarely used because of the sparks that could burn through skins or clothing. An important technique was the use of heat-retaining stones. A ring of stones was laid around the hearth, which were heated by the fire and continued to radiate heat even after the flames died down. Sometimes hot stones were rolled up in leather bundles and used as warmers for feeder beds. Stone has a high heat capacity and gives off heat slowly and gently. The hearth was not simply placed on the ground, but in a small depression. This protected the coals from drafts and concentrated the heat. A reflector made of raw wood or stone was often placed behind the fire. It directed the heat radiation towards people rather than an empty wall. It was the simplest infrared heater. The ability to keep a fire going was an art. At night, the coals were covered with ash so that they would smolder until morning without burning out completely. In the morning, it was enough to fan them and throw in a little kindling to get the flame going again. Carrying fire with you in a special horn or pot with coals allowed you to quickly build a fire at a new campsite. Losing fire in winter could be a fatal mistake. The smoke from a small fire in the teepee rose in a thin stream and went straight into the smoke hole. Controlling the smoke valves, the ears of the teepee, was a duty that was taught from childhood. By turning the valves downwind, it was possible to create the perfect draft, sucking out the smoke like a vacuum cleaner. If the smoke remained inside, it was considered a sign of a bad housekeeper or an unskilled builder. A small fire was also used for cooking. Pots or meat suspended over the coals cooked slowly and evenly. A large fire burned the food on the outside, leaving it raw on the inside. Cooking and heating were inextricably linked in a single life-supporting process. The heat from cooking was an important part of the overall heat balance of the dwelling. This philosophy of minimalism and efficiency permeated the entire way of life of indigenous peoples. Take from nature exactly as much as you need, without wasting resources. A small fire is a symbol of respect for the forest and understanding of one's true needs. This is a lesson that is relevant even in an era of energy crises. It turns out that the size of the flame does not guarantee warmth if you do not know how to control it. Not all Native Americans lived in spacious tipis or longhouses. In the southern plains and desert regions, where the Apache and Comanche lived, compact dwellings called wigwams were used. These dome-shaped huts were built on the principle of minimizing the volume to be heated. The less air inside, the faster it can be heated by breathing and a tiny fire. A wigwam was essentially a rigid tent covered with grass, brush, mats, or skins. The frame of the wigwam was made of flexible young trees, which were stuck into the ground in a circle and tied together at the tops. The result was a strong and elastic dome, capable of withstanding the strong winds of open spaces. The covering was multi-layered, first branches and grass for insulation, then skins or tarpaulin to protect from rain. The air trapped in the layers of dry grass acted as an excellent insulator. Such dwellings were low, often making it impossible to stand up straight. But this was an advantage in winter. Warm air accumulated under the low ceiling, right where people sat. There was no need to heat the useless space above their heads. The entrance was made small and covered with a skin to minimize heat loss. Inside, there was semi-darkness and coziness, created by the close proximity of people and fire. The floor inside the wigwam was also lined with grass and juniper or sage branches. This not only provided insulation, but also a pleasant aroma that disinfected the air. The cleanliness and smell of fresh herbs made staying in the small space comfortable. The beds were rolled up during the day to free up space and rolled out at night, taking up almost the entire floor area. Despite its apparent fragility, the wigwam was a surprisingly stable structure. Its round shape allowed the wind to flow around it on all sides, finding no point of support for destruction. If necessary, such a dwelling could be built in a few hours from materials at hand. This gave the tribes incredible mobility and independence from complex logistics. To heat the wigwam, they often used coals from a large communal fire that burned outside. The coals were brought inside to a pit hearth, where they provided heat without smoke. This solved the problem of ventilation in such a small space. People warmed themselves with the radiant heat of the coals, sitting shoulder to shoulder around them. This approach to housing can be called extreme minimalism. Nothing superfluous, only functionality and survival. This is a dwelling for those who are constantly on the move, for warriors and hunters. It teaches us that a person needs very little space for comfort if it is organized correctly. Even today, reenactors and survival experts are amazed at the efficiency of wigwams. When built correctly, it is possible to maintain a positive temperature inside even without a fire, using only body heat. It is a triumph of simple physics over complex environmental conditions. Small dwellings meant greater family cohesion, cramped but not uncomfortable, and certainly warm. The architecture of indigenous peoples intuitively used the principles of thermodynamics that we study in universities today. One of these principles was the creation of heat traps and the management of cold pits. Native Americans understood that warm air is light and rises, while cold air is heavy and flows downward like water. All of their dwellings were designed with this invisible movement in mind. We have already mentioned the recessed entrances to snow dwellings, but this principle was applied more widely. In earthen houses and even some tipis, the floor level was often made lower than the ground level. This turned the living space itself into a bowl that retained air heated by the earth and fire. The cold wind rushing over the surface could not blow out the heat from this pit. It worked like a trench, protecting not from bullets, but from the cold. Doorways were always made low and narrow. To enter, one had to bend down. This was not a sign of humility, but a way to keep the heat trap under the ceiling. A tall door would let all the warm air out in a second. A low entrance allowed people to come and go with minimal disruption to the temperature inside. Double curtains were often used at the entrance to create an airlock. Inside the dwellings, sleeping places were raised on platforms. This was done not only for softness, but also to raise the sleeping person from the area of the coldest air, which spreads along the floor. The temperature difference between the floor and a height of half a meter could be several degrees. In winter conditions, these degrees were crucial. The platforms also protected against dampness and rodents. The use of internal partitions and screens is interesting. In large houses, the space was divided into zones so that empty corners did not need to be heated. Screens made of skins or mats directed heat from the hearth to the sleeping areas, creating corridors for warm air. This was manual convection control. The Indians were conductors of air currents in their homes. Even the placement of tipis in a camp was not chaotic. They were placed in a circle or semicircle, creating wind protection for the central area. The entrance to the circle was often blocked or guarded so that the wind would not disperse inside the camp. Neighboring tipis acted as windbreaks for each other. Collective architecture enhanced the efficiency of individual dwellings. Storing things along the walls around the perimeter of the dwelling created an additional layer of insulation. Bags of supplies, tools, saddles. All of this served as insulation for the walls. Things did not just lie around. They served as a barrier against the cold. Each item was used to its maximum utility. What is striking about these technologies is the understanding of gas physics without physics textbooks. This knowledge was gained through experience, trial and error, and paid for with the lives of those who made mistakes. The result was perfect adaptation to the environment. Knowing where cold and heat accumulated allowed people to survive with minimal resources. The last secret of the Indians was not in the walls or clothing, but in themselves. The human body is also a stove, and indigenous peoples knew how to fire it up to full power. The basis of their winter resilience was a special diet high in fat and protein. Pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries, was the ideal winter fuel. A small piece of pemmican gave the body energy to keep warm for several hours. Europeans who ate bread and porridge froze faster as carbohydrates burned quickly and produced less heat. Living in the wild since childhood toughened them up. Native Americans saw cold as a natural part of the world, not something to be scared of. Their pain threshold and sensitivity to cold were different due to adaptation. They could work with their bare hands in the cold, bathe in ice water, and sleep in conditions that seemed unbearable to Europeans. This physiological hardening was the result of their lifestyle. Psychological attitude played a huge role. Panic and fear of the cold kill faster than the frost itself. Shivering saps your strength. The Indians knew how to enter a state of calm energy conservation by slowing their breathing and controlling muscle tension. They knew that as long as you were calm and well-fed, the cold was not scary. It was a kind of survival meditation. An active lifestyle did not stop in winter. Hunting, gathering firewood, games, and dancing maintained muscle tone and blood circulation. Sitting and shivering was not in their nature. Children played in the snow for hours, building up their immunity. Movement generated internal heat, which clothing only retained. Drinking hot herbal and bark teas helped warm them from the inside and provided vitamins. Pine needle tea, rich in vitamin C, protected against scurvy and strengthened the body. Knowledge of the healing and tonic properties of plants was part of the winter strategy. Nature provided not only cold, but also means of protection against it. Social support was also important. Loneliness in winter is dangerous. People cared for each other, sharing warmth and food. The elderly and children were given the best places by the fire. A sense of camaraderie helped them survive the long, dark nights. The moral spirit of the tribe was as important a resource as firewood. They knew how to recognize the signs of hypothermia and take action in time. Rubbing with snow or fat, vigorous massage, warming with another person's body heat. Everyone knew these first aid methods. Death from cold did occur, but more often than not, it was the result of tragic accident rather than ignorance. Ultimately, their secret lay in the harmony between the internal and the external. Warm homes, warm clothes, hearty food, and a strong spirit created an impenetrable defense. They did not hide from winter. They lived life to the fullest in it. The history of indigenous people's survival is a hymn to the capabilities of the human body and mind. We are capable of much more than we are accustomed to thinking while sitting in warm apartments. The legacy of these skills lives on today in survival schools and among bushcraft enthusiasts. We have seen that the strategy of catching heat rather than seeking it proved successful in the harsh conditions of North America. The Indians created unique technologies for housing, clothing, and everyday life based on a deep understanding of the laws of nature. Their tipis, dugouts, and longhouses were masterpieces of energy efficiency that modern architects are only now beginning to rethink. From the use of air gaps to proper diet, everything was part of a unified survival system. Instead of wasting resources on a futile struggle against the elements, they learned to use their properties to their advantage. Snow became insulation, the earth became a battery, and animal skins became a second skin. This is a lesson in wisdom and observation that is relevant at any time. Comfort does not always require complex machines. Sometimes it is enough to simply know how the world around us works. What other secrets of Indigenous people's way of life would you like to learn about? Write your suggestions for future videos in the comments, for example, about their medicine or hunting methods, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past.